So I need to say thank you. I got a few emails last week, really nice emails. It feels like some of your groups are really engaging with the material, so thank you for the kind words I received. This is quite thoughtful material, and I just want to reiterate that it really is one theory of how faith works in people's lives. And you can take it as, it's interesting just to learn about the stage theory, but also it's a helpful self-reflection tool to think about what your own journey of faith has been like and how God has been present with you and how you've been thinking about God and how together you have been living this life step by step together in this process of what God's love does specifically, which is healing. Fred, do you think it's going to work? Okay, in a few minutes. We're waiting on the PowerPoint. Last week we talked about stage 4, which is that inward journey, and then sitting at the wall. This week we're going to talk about stage 5 and stage 6. Next week I'd like to have it kind of be an open forum a little bit, so if you could put together a few questions that have come up from your group that we could talk about next week, that you could bring forward for the larger group, and we could talk a little bit about those questions that have come out. I'd like to end with kind of an open process for our time together. I also have in mind a kind of spiritual exercise that we can do looking back on your life and just noticing how you've experienced each stage. Just when were times when you've been touched by each stage of the journey. So we'll do kind of an open forum and a little bit of a spiritual exercise next week. This week, however, let's go into stage 5. And this one is called the journey outward. So stage 4, we go inward. We notice a crisis that we have. The things that gave us a sense of certainty and security no longer do that for us. And so we have to then face the hard things that are going on inside of us. And we sit at the wall for quite a time. And I don't know if you remember, the authors say you can't go over the wall, you can't go around it, you can't go under it, you have to go through the wall. And the process of going through the wall is a process of healing and a process of transformation. And so you come out through the wall into stage 5, having a different image of God, a deeper understanding of who God's created you to be, and also a sense of freedom to live into who God's created you to be. You no longer depend on what a leader says a Christian should look like, what some community says what a Christian should look like. You have your own inner sense of knowing and trust based on your experience of this wall and this journey through it and this now really deep, intimate relationship with God. The tradition definitely informs how we understand ourselves to be people of faith. It matters that we're Christian. It matters that we're formed by the church and this long tradition of who is Christ, what does the death and resurrection mean for us. That shapes who we are. In fact, the Christian tradition says as we grow in faith, we become more and more Christ-like, that Christ becomes alive in us and we discover our true self in that union between us and Christ. But the experience of this Christian faith becomes much more personal, and we're able to claim it as our own, rather than someone else told me this is what it is and what I have to believe. In stage 5, faith is surrendering to God. That word is troubling to many people, to surrender to God. I think it's really important that we recognize what our image of God is. It's hard to surrender to a God. If you think of God, I have this book that I want to recommend to you, Good Goats Healing Our Image of God. They talk about God as old Uncle George. And they talk about him as, and the author says, his name is, there's 3 authors. Dennis is the one who writes this section. Dennis says, my whole family's German, So for me, God is old Uncle George, a crabby, very old German guy. And and Dennis realized that his image of God was trying to please this very old man who was super judgmental and harsh. No one wants to surrender to a God who's angry and judgmental and harsh. The experience of going through the wall and experiencing that healing, we come out on the other side and notice that, in fact, God isn't old Uncle George. God is more mysterious. God is grace. God is compassion. God is patience. God is gentle. It's okay to really reflect on what is my image of God. Can I let go of old Uncle George and embrace the God that Jesus does reflect, who God is, here for people who are hurting, feeding the hungry, bringing in those who are in the margins, self-giving. Love is more powerful than hate, death, and violence. Jesus says, "Come to me, you who are weary. I'm gentle and humble heart, and I will give you rest." So when we surrender, when we let go of our will in order to embrace God's will, which is what surrender means, we're surrendering to this kind of a God, this image of God who is gentle, promises rest, and wants to bring healing to us for the sake of bringing healing to all the world. Okay, let's look at the characteristics of, oh, good, thanks, Fred, you did it. I wanted to include this picture of a caterpillar. What is that? I can't, yes. This part of faith is really important. Just the waiting. And giving ourselves the time we need in solitude. That's what the experience of the journey inward and the wall really is like, is being in that chrysalis and waiting for God to do what God's going to do. That's kind of a nice image of what surrender is, of just putting ourselves in God's hands, letting go of the need to try and figure out who we are and what we're supposed to do and how we make ourselves better, but just waiting and surrendering to God through that process of God doing the work through us. The journey outward, the chrysalis, that caterpillar, will become a butterfly, which is the promise of transformation, healing, and an Easter, that from that tomb, Jesus comes out as the resurrected Christ. So when I put this, we don't have to stay in the chrysalis. We won't. We will eventually emerge to new life. But it's worth giving ourselves the time to wait. So the journey outward, once we come out of that chrysalis, we have a renewed sense of God's acceptance, a new sense of the horizontal life, a sense of calling, vocation, or ministry, a concern and focus on others' best interests, and a deep calm or stillness. I think this stage really does have, the certainty goes to this sense of God's acceptance, where there's just an unwavering certainty that God is love and God loves me. So that certainty is transformed from black and white thinking of this is right, this is wrong, this is how you have to believe in order to be in, to a certainty in God's love and grace and acceptance for me and for all people. So there's that renewed sense of God's acceptance. A new sense of the horizontal life. In stage 4 and at the wall, we were really focused on the vertical life, the relationship between myself and God, and just giving that time. Once we get through stage 4 and the wall, that vertical life then becomes horizontal. And we just step out and live into this sense of call, vocation, or ministry. The sense of call, vocation, or ministry, we start to be able to let go of not everything is mine to do. Our path becomes a little more narrow as we get a bit more aware of who God's created us to be, and we're able to let go of a lot of the shoulds and outer expectations for a deep inner knowing of this is how I am to be in the world today. And this can be, it can be that some of us are going to have a really big call, like to lead a social cause, and some of us might be called to be a caregiver to somebody and a daily just showing up to the person. For example, one of my spiritual directors in the past, Tom Allen, his wife was diagnosed with early onset dementia, and he left a big job. He did, just changed his life completely because he felt like his vocation was to be with her through that journey of early onset dementia. And he followed that path of being a caregiver, which then led to other avenues. But his path, his calling, he realized he just felt called to be present to his spouse. And from there, God was able to do some great work through him to also bless other people in the world who were going through it. But he was able to let go of, I should be doing all these great things to, and I just really need to be a caregiver right now. So there's a humility that comes in this stage where we don't need our big ego demands to be met anymore. We're just present to the calling in front of us. All mysterious still. But what I want to share with that is that it's intended to take the pressure off of the striving that we often feel in stage 2 or stage 3. There does become the sense of a concern and focus on others' best interests. I think in a room of women, it's always important to say, it's important that we tend to our self-care and our relationship with God, and from there flows good care. There does something to be called, when we think about others' best interests, I'm starting to think of this more like putting the best picture or image, or that assuming that they have good intentions, rather than just automatically going to, they drive me crazy. Assuming they're going through something too, you know what I mean, where you just don't get so mad at them anymore. We want what's good for other people, and we assume the best of them. We don't have to put others before ourselves. It's okay for us to be equal with other people, tend to our self-care, serve from that place, but also see other people in the best light we can, because that's how we're called to be as Christians. This deep calm or stillness is a real gift, something we all long for, something that we know we can return to from our experience in stage 4 and being at the wall, that place of solitude and stillness that we experience in giving ourselves the time in stage 4 in the wall. We can always return to it, but every time we return to it, it just grows it inside, and eventually it's a deep calm and stillness within our soul. And it is a part of stage 5 and stage 6, that there is a settling of our spirits. And I think it goes back to the assurance and certainty of God's love and God's acceptance. The authors say that people in stage 5 don't really get caged. They just look like they're caged by other people who aren't in these stages. So, for example, people who are in stage 5 will sometimes look like they're out of touch with practical concerns. They're not as worried about the details of life. They'll let some things go, like they'll let the dishes be dirty for quite a while because they had to go take care of a baby duck that needed help, or something like that. So the practical concerns of life, the details of life can sometimes just be not there because they're so focused on living into this care, this way of healing, this love. They aren't really caught, but they appear to be. And this apparently careless about important things, I think it's the same thing, that it's important to other people, but not important to the person in stage 5. And so it seems as though they're careless about important things. This one it's really hard to understand how a person can get to a place where they don't get caught or caged. I think it's important too, at this part of our juncture of learning together, we all are kind of going back and forth in all these stages. So we'll still get caught in a stage that we've kind of made our way through. But in this stage, you don't get caged. But you still can get caged in the other stages. Does that make sense? It might not. I'm really in sick brain, so I apologize if I don't make sense today. Okay. Moving from stage 5 to stage 6 looks like there's no more striving, you're just evolving, and you're growing deeper. So you've let go of this need to figure out, what is my life's purpose? What am I supposed to be doing? Instead of striving to figure it out, you just let life be, and you take one step in front of the other, and you just evolve, growing deeper in your relationship with yourself and with God and with others. Moving from stage 5 to 6, you start to see, or you do see God in all of life, including the hard things that happen. For example, I was in a prayer group several years ago, and one of the people was diagnosed with cancer. And he brought to the prayer group a request for prayer. So we all got around him and prayed, and he brought a poem about accepting even this cancer diagnosis as a gift, that somehow in it he would experience God's grace and God's love, and he would grow deeper in his relationship with God. He said, I don't want this cancer. I don't believe you brought this to me, God, but I even welcome this because I think you'll do something in it and through this cancer diagnosis. So he was even able to see God in that very scary experience of getting cancer. Moving from stage 5 to 6, you start to see yourself as God's person. So rather than being a member of a group, or a congregation, or following a leader, which is true about us, the more central sense of an identity is, nope, I'm God's person. And that relationship with God is really the most central thing about who you are, moving from 5 to 6. I wanted to share this picture. I was at a park near our house, and I was sitting at a bench. It was a beautiful day, and this bush near me there were bees swarming it. And I was struck by how this bee with a stinger, and I know who hasn't been stung by a bee, right? It hurts. But it was so beautiful. So for me, the bee kind of represents, and so much in nature represents, really fully growing into who God's created us to be. This bee is just being itself, stinger and all. And that's the invitation for us, too, to just be who God's created us to be. And that's what the journey of faith really is all about, going from stage 1 into stage 6, is continuing to grow and grow and grow and evolve into who God dreamed us into being. And there's a greater purpose than just our own sense of meaning and lessening our anxiety and all that. It's really to participate in God's healing in the world, in God's restoration, in God's promise of resurrection and new life. That we're really participating in something much bigger than us when we live into who God's created us to be. And sometimes I think nature, I wanted to share this because it's really our best example of what it looks like to just be who you are and be that well. Okay, catalysts, things we can do to kind of help ourselves move into stage 6 from stage 5 is your vocation is satisfying and being whole seems enough. So I think it's really about this stage of faith. Simplicity is an important word in this, and humility. That we don't need as much as we used to need. That who we are and the way we get to live in the world is just, it's satisfying, it's enough. Being whole is the most meaningful part of our existence. We're able to just let go of some of the other things that fed the stuff we thought we needed before we had this journey of healing and wholeness through the wall and into stage 5 and 6. Now we're understanding that we can just be satisfied with what God's given us in who we are and the life we live each day. We start to see the real gifts of the simple life we have. Okay, stage 6. This one is called the life of love. And faith is reflecting God. So we really start to look like God because the image of God in this stage is a union, that we are just completely united with God. That God is alive in us, and our spirit and God's spirit are one. Some words that I would use with this stage are union with God, but also freedom and simplicity. Freedom is a big part of stage 5 and stage 6. We're able to let go of a lot of things and just say yes to what God's inviting us to be and to do. Characteristics of stage 6 are Christ-like living in total obedience to God, wisdom gained from life's struggles, compassionate living for others, detachment from things and stress, life underneath or on top, and life abandoned. I'll tell you who the best. Some examples of stage 6 are Jesus and Gandhi. So we can take the pressure off of ourselves. But Jesus really is the example of what someone who is stage 6 looks like as they go about living. And I want to read to you this paragraph because it raises a couple of things I think are really important for us as Christians. Although many see Jesus as operating with a special advantage of knowing everything and thus knowing the end from the beginning, the Jesus of the Gospels goes through his own growth and development. I think that's something really worth wrestling with. The possibility, and I think probability, that Jesus goes through his own growth and development. That he actually didn't know how it was all going to go. That he didn't have God's plan, his life totally mapped out, and he knew what every single day of his life was going to be like. That his journey was similar to ours in that every day he woke up and he listened for God. And he listened for who God created him to be. And he did the best he could to make those decisions of how he was going to live, always seeking the kingdom first. they go on to say, Jesus saw his way prefigured in the Hebrew scriptures as a suffering servant rather than as a conquering hero. So the scriptures give him insight into who he was, that he came as a suffering servant rather than a conquering hero. That's really important. His tradition taught him who he was. He came for peace and gentleness and forgiveness, not war and violence. That's a big difference. So he understood himself to be a suffering servant. He learned from his rejection by the religious authorities, his friends, and his family. So he learned from others just like we do. He was not surprised by the disloyalty of his own disciples. And on the night before his death, Jesus prayed for God to provide another way, but only if it was God's will, which he was committed to follow. Jesus is an example of stage 6, this life of love and reflecting God. He remained committed to God's will and to discerning God's will. He accepted the hard things that came to him, but he wasn't a wimp about it. He didn't just say, oh, I can suffer for no reason. He went into the garden and he prayed hard, right? And he finally realized, I have to accept death. This is part of living as who I am, that I have to even accept death and let go of my desire to stay alive and to stay safe and to realize that they're going to kill me. And I have to even be open to this. You know, I think of people like Martin Luther King or others who put themselves in harm's way for a greater purpose. They're willing to say yes to danger and even losing their life for the sake of something greater. And for Jesus, that's what he does in the cross. He's willing to let go of his life for the purpose of God's will for the world, which is life and love and forgiveness. So Jesus, in saying yes to God's will, Jesus is saying, yes, I even have to accept the reality that I'm going to die in a hard way. But I'm saying yes to this loving God who promises to bring good things out of this and to let go of it all in order to participate in God's healing. Huge mystery, right? It's really deep stuff. Okay. So Jesus, characteristics of stage 6 are Christ-like living in total obedience to God, wisdom gained from life struggles. Jesus gained some wisdom, and so can we from life struggles. He learned from the rejection of the religious leaders, his disciples' disloyalty. Even when we go through life, God is still faithful. Even when things are hard, we don't have to get caught up in all of the what ifs, what might have beens. We can remain present to God's love, God's life, God's healing and purpose for me. I love this next one, to detach from things and stress. Wouldn't life be amazing if we were detached from stress? But Jesus was able to live from a detachment from things and stress. And he says it in, look at the lilies of the field. Do they worry about anything? And God still takes care of them. That is a total trust in God's care. A total putting my life, whatever happens to me, even the hard things, trusting in God's care. This life underneath or on top is, it doesn't matter how God calls me to serve. God may call me to take care of my spouse with early onset dementia for the rest of my life. God may call me to be the president. You might be called, your calling may be to the highest reaches of power to the more humble, no one ever sees me doing my calling. Whatever we sense God's call is for us at stage 6, we can't help but say yes. And life abandoned means we're even able and willing to let go of our life for the sake of living into this call from God. There was a really cool, I don't think I marked it well. There's an example from Gandhi that I want to share, and I did mark it well. This comes in compassionate living for others, this characteristic. In Gandhi's autobiography, he told a practicing Muslim that if he truly wanted forgiveness and love to flow from God, he should raise the child of a Hindu man who had murdered the questioner's son in his home. Not only that, but most difficult of all, he should raise the child as a Hindu. So the man looked shocked and walked away. A stage 6 person could raise an enemy's child because of the compassion given him or her by God. It's really a radical compassion. Gandhi is inviting this Muslim person to imagine raising up his enemy's child and raising him in the faith of his enemy, not in his own faith. And the authors say that is what a stage 6 person can do. They can love their enemy enough that they could raise the person who murdered their family member, or the son of the person who murdered their family member, and raise them in the other faith. So there's a depth of spirit, a depth of soul, a depth of understanding how deep and wide and mysterious God's compassion and love is in this stage 6. Much like stage 5, stage 6 aren't really caged, but they appear caged to other people who aren't in this stage with them. They're a separation from the world, meaning that they don't really get what's going on in the world. They kind of live in their own sphere. They have a neglect of self and an apparent waste of their life. So that really, those things are coming, they're judgments from people who are not in that stage 6 place with others. They seem to not have an understanding of what the world is really like. They seem to, I imagine, when I see neglect of self, I imagine someone with kind of messy hair. They forget to shower for a couple days. I don't know, or forget to eat because they're just so into just living. An apparent waste of life. You can think about that. Just sometimes what people who are willing to sacrifice their lives, including Jesus, at such a young age. He was only 33 when he died. So, we wouldn't say that his life was a waste, but you could see, why would you put yourself in danger like that? You have so much more life to live. But this stage 6 place is really a place of deeply being connected and in union with God and just being able to let go of what the world's concerns are and living so freely, just total freedom, simplicity, union with God, and a clear vision of love, compassion, justice, peace, truth, the things that the scriptures often preach about. Okay. So, a reminder that these stages are, thanks, Fred. These stages capture a whole experience of the possibility of a human life. We have moments in each of them. At each season of life, we have a home stage. We will revisit these stages and the wall throughout our life. We can get caged in any of them at any time. spiritual care of ourselves, making a commitment to solitude, prayer, having spiritual friendships and groups to be a part of are really important, because it does matter that we're formed by our community, and it does matter for us to be able to be with others who help us know where we come from and who we are. It's good to have friends on the journey. At stage 4 and 5, it's real helpful too. Stage 4 in the wall, there are people trained to help you be guided through that. Spiritual direction is a ministry for that. I know great spiritual directors in the Twin Cities if you're interested in talking to someone. Counselors help really well. Pastors can help too, even though the book says watch out for pastors. But friends really help a lot. So I encourage you to continue the conversation. Please come up with a couple good questions for next week that we can talk about together as a large group. And I look forward to our last week together next week. Stay healthy.